The wildfires were raging across California like a beast that couldn't be tamed. The smell of smoke filled the air, thick and suffocating. Even miles away from the epicenter, people were fleeing their homes, hoping to escape the inferno that seemed to consume everything in its path. The news was filled with images of charred remains, ruined houses, and frantic residents. But amid the chaos and devastation, one tweet from Elon Musk caused a ripple that no one could ignore. It was late in the evening, the sky painted with shades of orange from the fires, when Musk tweeted, "The real cause behind these wildfires is something no one is talking about. The truth is being hidden." Within moments, the tweet exploded across social media. Everyone had an opinion. Some scoffed, calling it a conspiracy theory. Others were intrigued, wondering what Musk could possibly mean. The media was divided, with some outlets speculating that Musk was hinting at climate change or corporate negligence, while others dismissed it as just another eccentric statement from the tech mogul. But one thing was certain, Musk's tweet was the spark that would ignite a firestorm of its own. "Did you see that?" Sophie Turner, an environmental activist, said to her colleague as she scrolled through her phone. She had been fighting for better climate policies for years, but this was different. "Elon Musk is saying there's something more to these wildfires." Yeah, right. What could he possibly know?" her colleague Jason replied dismissively. "He's just a billionaire with a Twitter account. What does he care about wildfires?" But Sophie's eyes narrowed as she read the tweet again. There was something in the way Musk phrased it that didn't feel like just a passing comment. She had spent years tracking environmental disasters, and these fires were unlike anything she'd seen before. There had to be more to it than just climate change, right? Back in his mansion in Los Angeles, Elon Musk leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen of his laptop. His latest tweet was already getting thousands of replies. Most were mocking him, calling him crazy. Some were demanding he provide evidence to back up his claims. But there were others, like Sophie, who seemed to understand that this wasn't just another bizarre Musk moment. It was something more. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. This wasn't just a passing thought. Musk had been tracking the wildfires for weeks, using his own satellites and SpaceX technology to analyze patterns in the data. What he had discovered was alarming, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. Was this the right time, he wondered? What if no one believed him? What if he was wrong? He shook the thought away. He wasn't wrong. The data was clear. Something was happening that no one could explain, something no one wanted to talk about. The firestorm was only just beginning. As the night wore on, the conversation around Musk's tweet intensified. It wasn't just the people in California who were starting to ask questions. This was becoming global. Every major news outlet had picked up the story. Climate experts, tech insiders, and even some of Musk's old friends and rivals began speculating about what he meant. In Washington, a government official, Richard Graham, sat at his desk, his phone buzzing with notifications. Musk's tweet had reached the highest levels of government, and now Richard was tasked with finding out what, if anything, the billionaire was hinting at. "I don't trust him," Richard muttered, swiping through the responses on his phone. "He's always stirring up trouble. But if there's even a grain of truth to this, we need to know." Back in California, as the fires continued to spread, Sophie decided to take matters into her own hands. She wasn't just going to sit around and wait for someone else to figure out what Musk meant. She had been tracking the fires for years, and there were patterns that didn't add up. If Musk was right, if there was something bigger behind these fires, then it was up to people like her to find out what was really going on. As the day came to a close, people everywhere were asking themselves the same question: what if Musk was onto something? And with that question, the hunt for the truth began. The world was watching, and no one knew just how far the ripple from one simple tweet would go. Musk had sparked something much bigger than just a conversation. He had sparked a movement that would challenge everything people thought they knew about wildfires, climate change, and the future of the planet. And with each passing moment, that movement was gaining momentum. The spark had been lit, and nothing Not even the wildfires themselves could stop what was coming next. Elon Musk had always been a man driven by the pursuit of the impossible. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, his journey was marked by a relentless drive to change the world. But this time, his quest wasn't about electric cars, space exploration, or artificial intelligence. This time, it was about something far more urgent, uncovering a truth that had been hidden for far too long. He was the son of a Canadian mother and a South African father, both of whom had their own unique ambitions. His mother, May, was a nutritionist and model, while his father, Errol, was an engineer and a man of grandiose dreams. Musk's relationship with his father was strained, and as a child, Elon often felt like an outsider in his own family. But that sense of isolation led him to a deep love for books, technology, and the potential for creating a better world. From a young age, Musk demonstrated an incredible aptitude for learning. By the age of 12, he had already taught himself computer programming and sold his first video game. His natural curiosity and insatiable appetite for knowledge drove him forward, even when others didn't believe in his ideas. His entrepreneurial spirit emerged early on. Creating, dreaming, and challenging the status quo were embedded in his DNA. But it wasn't just about building companies for him. From the beginning, Musk had been focused on the future of humanity. He dreamed of making life multiplanetary, building sustainable energy solutions, and revolutionizing transportation. SpaceX, Tesla, and SolarCity were all part of this grand vision, one that combined his technical genius with his desire to change the world. And now, in the midst of a global environmental crisis, that vision was about to collide with a new reality. Musk's tweet about the wildfires was no accident. It had been weeks, perhaps even months, of quiet research and data analysis that led him to this moment. While the rest of the world focused on the immediate damage caused by the fires, Elon Musk had been watching from a distance, piecing together the puzzle. He had the resources and the technology to do so, but the question was, did anyone else see the patterns he saw? As he sat at his desk, his fingers still hovering above the keyboard after sending the tweet, Musk reflected on the very nature of the problem he was facing. Wildfires were becoming increasingly frequent and severe. Every year, more acres of forest were being burned, more homes were lost, and more lives were disrupted. But there was something different this time, something he couldn't ignore. The fires were not behaving the way they should. Musk had always been a man of action, someone who preferred to work behind the scenes, solving problems with technology and innovation. But this was a public issue, and he couldn't sit idly by any longer. The technology he had access to, his satellites, SpaceX's cutting-edge imaging systems, and Tesla's AI capabilities, had allowed him to look at the fires from a different angle. He saw something others didn't, an anomaly. A series of patterns in the fire spread suggested something more was at play. But why hadn't anyone else noticed? The data was there, right in front of him. The fires seemed to spread in ways that didn't align with natural conditions. Winds didn't seem to play the role they normally would. The speed and intensity of some of the blazes were far beyond the ordinary. And there was one more thing. The fires were happening in areas that hadn't been prone to such disasters in the past. What was causing these wildfires to act so unusually? Elon leaned back in his chair, staring at the map on his screen. He had a team of scientists and data analysts who helped him comb through the information, but even they were starting to be confused by the findings. This wasn't just climate change, as devastating as that was. There was a hidden factor involved, something that went beyond the usual explanations. As he dug deeper, a chilling realization started to form. The fires could be linked to a large-scale environmental project, one that had been in the works for years but had been kept under wraps. Musk's mind raced. What if these fires were an unintended consequence of a technology that was supposed to be a solution? And what if the people behind it had known about it all along but had kept it quiet for their own benefit? Musk's hand trembled slightly as he typed another message to his team, asking them to double down on the research. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was onto something huge, something that, if revealed, would have a massive impact on the world. The question was the world ready for it? Meanwhile, across the country, Sophie Turner watched the unfolding drama with a mix of confusion and curiosity. She had spent years working as an environmental activist, tracking the impact of climate change, advocating for better policies, and pushing for action. But the recent wildfires were unlike any disaster she had ever seen. It wasn't just the scale, it was the speed at which the fires spread. She had seen wildfires before in places like Colorado and Oregon, but this was different. Sophie was sitting at her desk in her small apartment in San Francisco when she first saw Musk's tweet. She had been keeping a close eye on the fires, following the news and watching the numbers climb as each day brought more devastation. But Musk's cryptic message caught her attention. She wasn't one to blindly follow celebrities or tech moguls, but Musk had a track record of surprising people. With his insights, there was a reason why he was the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX. He saw things that others didn't. Sophie opened her laptop and quickly typed in the hashtag #MuskFires to see if anyone else was talking about it. The tweet had gone viral, and there were already thousands of comments ranging from disbelief to outrage. Some were calling him a fool, while others were wondering if he was onto something. It wasn't long before Sophie found herself clicking through links and watching interviews with climate scientists, all of whom seemed to be missing the point. They talked about the rising temperatures, the drying forests, and the increased frequency of fires due to climate change, but none of them were talking about the bigger picture. None of them were asking the questions Musk was hinting at. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something hidden beneath the surface. In the days that followed, Sophie couldn't stop thinking about Musk's tweet. She knew that if there was even a chance that he was right, the world needed to know. And if anyone could uncover the truth, it would be someone like her, a dedicated activist who had spent years fighting for the environment. She made a decision then and there. She was going to find out what Musk was really talking about. The clock was ticking. The world was focused on the fires, but Sophie knew that what lay behind them could be even more devastating. And with that, her journey to uncover the truth began. The world was watching. The fires raged on, but beneath it all, something much larger was unfolding. A story that could change everything. The truth was out there, and now it was up to people like Elon Musk and Sophie Turner to piece it together. The world had barely recovered from Elon Musk's shocking tweet when the reaction began to swell into something far beyond anyone's expectations. Media outlets scrambled to report on the tweet, dissecting every word, trying to understand what Musk was alluding to. For some, it was just another outrageous statement from a billionaire with too much time on his hands. For others, it felt like a puzzle begging to be solved. In Washington, D.C., the government's response was swift. The White House issued a statement that appeared to dismiss Musk's comments, but there was a palpable tension behind the scenes. Richard Graham, a high-ranking government official responsible for environmental policy, couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Musk's cryptic message. "Get me everything we have on those wildfires," Richard ordered his team. "We need to know if Musk's onto something or if he's just trying to stir the pot." His mind raced. Wildfires were an annual occurrence, especially in California, but something had been off about this year's fires. The spread seemed unnatural, almost too fast. As a climate expert, Richard understood the dangers of ignoring potential warning signs. What if Musk had discovered something that the government had overlooked? Meanwhile, across the country in California, Sophie Turner was already hard at work. Sophie had always been one to act quickly. She didn't have the luxury of waiting for answers. Every minute mattered when lives were on the line. But even as she began her research into the wildfires, she knew that Musk's tweet had struck a nerve. He had raised a question that no one else seemed to be asking. Was there something behind the fires that the public wasn't being told? She sat at her desk in her apartment, her eyes glued to the screen as she pored over satellite images, fire patterns, and government reports. At first, the data seemed standard: wildfires triggered by dry conditions, high winds, and climate change. But there was something deeper, something more subtle in the numbers. Sophie noticed the anomalies right away. The fires were moving differently than expected. They weren't following the typical paths dictated by wind patterns or topography. In some areas, fires would break out suddenly in places where they had never occurred before. These irregularities mirrored what Musk had alluded to in his tweet. The fires weren't just a consequence of climate change. Something else was fueling them, something far less natural. The more she dug, the more questions she had. But Sophie wasn't alone in her search for answers. She had received messages from across the globe, other activists, scientists, and concerned citizens who had noticed the same strange patterns. It was clear there was more to the story, and they needed to find out what it was. However, not everyone was eager to seek the truth. On social media, the divide between Musk's supporters and detractors deepened. Some of Musk's followers saw him as a hero, a visionary who was willing to speak out against the establishment. They praised his courage in challenging the narrative surrounding the wildfires. Others, however, dismissed him as a publicity-hungry billionaire who was simply trying to keep the public distracted from his many ventures, from the Tesla factory to his space exploration projects. As the world watched, the wildfire crisis became more than just a natural disaster. It became a battleground for truth, a test of humanity's willingness to question the status quo and look beyond the obvious. For Sophie, for Musk, and for everyone watching, the stakes couldn't be higher. Disputes over his SpaceX missions were nothing new. "What a mess," Jason, Sophie's colleague, muttered as he read through the comment threads. Some people think Musk is trying to save the world, and others think he's just trying to sell more cars. It's exhausting trying to figure out who's telling the truth. Sophie could hear the frustration in his voice. The truth, she knew, wasn't as easy to uncover as people thought. It was buried beneath layers of corporate interests, political agendas, and media manipulation. But there was something about Musk's cryptic tweet that made her believe he wasn't just spouting nonsense. He wasn't the type to make such a public statement without backing it up with something substantial. Sophie made a decision. She was going to reach out to Musk directly. If anyone could understand the data she had been analyzing, it was him. And maybe, just maybe, he could point her in the right direction. As she prepared to draft an email to the billionaire, her phone buzzed with a message from her mother, a longtime climate scientist. "Sophie," the message read, "there's more to this than you think. Be careful. Some people are watching." Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard rumors about corporate interests trying to suppress the truth about environmental disasters before, but this was different. If Musk had stumbled onto something that powerful, he wasn't the only one who might be in danger. Elsewhere, at SpaceX headquarters, Elon Musk was busy with his own internal conflict. He had expected some pushback, but the vitriol coming from all sides was starting to take its toll. His team of scientists and engineers had been working day and night to verify the data he'd uncovered, and the results were troubling, to say the least. But each time they got closer to the truth, Musk found himself facing more and more resistance, not just from the public but from the powers that be. He wasn't the type to back down easily, but this was different. The more he uncovered, the more it seemed like his discovery was becoming a threat to something far bigger than just a few wildfires. It was clear that someone, somewhere, had a vested interest in keeping this information under wraps. As he sat in his office late one evening, Musk's phone buzzed with a message from his legal team. "We've been contacted by representatives of several major corporations. They want to know what you're working on. Be careful." Elon Musk took a deep breath. He had spent years facing down critics, launching rockets into space, and building an electric car empire. But this felt different. There was something deeply sinister about the way these corporations were moving behind the scenes. And yet, he couldn't back down now. He had already stepped too far into the unknown. The world was waiting for the truth, and despite the pushback and threats, Elon Musk was determined to see it through. As the days passed, the tension continued to rise. The fires burned on, their destruction spreading across the West Coast like an unstoppable force. Sophie was digging deeper into the data. Musk was bracing for a battle with the powerful forces behind the scenes. And the rest of the world was holding its breath, wondering what the truth behind the wildfires really was. Soon, everything would change, and the fight for the truth was just beginning. Days turned into weeks, and as the wildfires raged on, the question that Elon Musk had ignited in his now famous tweet only grew more pressing. Sophie Turner, still locked in her mission to uncover the truth, found herself tangled in a web of complex data, corporate interference, and political pressure. The deeper she dug into the anomalies and the wildfire patterns, the clearer it became. There was something more than just climate change at play. It was late one night when Sophie sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen casting shadows around her apartment. She had spent hours reviewing satellite imagery, environmental reports, and fire behavior patterns. Her eyes were tired, but the data was undeniable. The fires weren't just breaking out in random locations. They followed a curious and unnatural path. Sophie's heart raced as she connected the dots. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the scientists she had been in contact with. "Sophie, I found something you need to see. Check this out." With trembling hands, Sophie clicked the link to the shared document. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The data showed that the wildfires were eerily synchronized with certain corporate activities. In particular, the fires seemed to emerge in areas with new industrial developments or near experimental environmental projects. The pattern wasn't random. It was orchestrated, deliberately timed with the interests of large corporations. The thought hit her like a jolt of electricity. Was it possible that these fires were engineered? Sophie's mind raced. What if these fires weren't just a natural disaster exacerbated by climate change? What if they were the result of a man-made catastrophe? One that had been hidden from the public. She quickly jotted down a note to herself: follow the money, follow the corporations. As she turned the findings over in her mind, a memory from a meeting a few weeks ago resurfaced. Sophie had been talking to one of her old contacts at an environmental watchdog group, a woman named Rachel, who had warned her about a new set of environmental experiments taking place in the region. Rachel had mentioned bioengineering as part of some cutting-edge corporate projects. Could this be what was fueling the fires? The idea was chilling. Sophie paused for a moment to take in the gravity of the situation. She wasn't just uncovering irregularities in fire behavior anymore. She was looking at the possible ignition of a corporate agenda hidden beneath the guise of environmentalism. Before she could get lost in the overwhelming complexity of the data, her phone rang again. It was Rachel. "Sophie, you need to stop what you're doing," Rachel said urgently. "I've just heard from some sources inside the industry. These fires are not an accident. There's been some new tech that's been deployed, some experimental technology that has been linked to triggering wildfires." "I can't say much, but it's real." Rachel's words sent a shiver down Sophie's spine. "What kind of technology are we talking about?" "I don't know all the details," Rachel said, "but it's connected to large-scale geoengineering projects. There are powerful players involved, and they've kept it quiet. Be careful." Sophie thanked Rachel and quickly hung up. Geoengineering. That was the term Rachel had used, a controversial, unregulated field that involved manipulating the environment using advanced technology. Musk had been a vocal critic of geoengineering projects in the past, warning about the unintended consequences of meddling with the Earth's systems. Could these fires be the result of something like this? Sophie's thoughts were interrupted by a new notification. "Elon Musk is live." The live stream popped up on her screen, and she clicked on it without thinking twice. Elon Musk's face filled the screen, looking serious, almost solemn. He was speaking to the public in a way that was far different from his usual bravado. "The wildfires we're witnessing are not the result of climate change alone," Musk began, his voice steady but heavy. "I've been watching these fires closely, analyzing the data, and what I've found is alarming. There are patterns here that shouldn't exist. Fires are breaking out where they shouldn't. They're spreading at a rate that defies natural explanation. I've come to the conclusion that there's more to this than what we've been told. And I won't stand idly by." Sophie's pulse quickened as she listened to Musk's words. This was it. Musk was making the same connection she had been suspecting. Something hidden was causing these wildfires. But what? And why wasn't anyone talking about it? Musk continued, outlining the evidence he had gathered: satellite data, fire behavior models, and even interviews with whistleblowers who had claimed that certain corporations were conducting experiments in the region that could be linked to the fires. He didn't give all the details, but it was clear that he was building a case. Musk's voice trembled slightly when he spoke about the potential consequences of the fires being manipulated for corporate gain. The world was about to find out that these wildfires were the tip of the iceberg. Musk's live stream sent shockwaves through the internet. It wasn't just the environmental community that was watching. The entire world was now focused on what he was revealing. People who had once written off Musk's eccentric statements now realized he might be onto something. This wasn't just a billionaire ranting. This was something much larger, and the stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. Sophie's hands shook as she closed her laptop and stared out the window, her mind reeling. Musk had just confirmed what she had feared. She wasn't alone in this fight, but now the true scale of the conspiracy was beginning to unfold. The powerful corporations that had been quietly conducting these geoengineering experiments had underestimated just how far Musk was willing to go to expose the truth. For Sophie, this was no longer just about the fires. It was about something far deeper, something that could change the very fabric of how humanity interacted with the environment. And she knew that if she wanted to get to the bottom of this, she had to act quickly. In the coming days, she began gathering everything she could on the geoengineering projects. Her focus was now crystal clear: expose the companies behind the fires. She began reaching out to sources, scientists, and whistleblowers who might have information, hoping to gather evidence that would link the fires to a larger corporate plot. But the danger was real. As she pushed further into the heart of the story, she realized that she wasn't just uncovering a conspiracy. She was stepping into a battle against forces that would stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. Into a world of shadowy interests that would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And now, with Musk's live stream gaining traction, those powerful forces were beginning to take notice of her work. Sophie had started a journey she couldn't stop, one that would lead her to face forces far more dangerous than any wildfire. The truth, she knew, was much darker than the fires themselves, and she was about to be caught in the flames. The next morning, Sophie woke up to a world that felt different. It wasn't just the weight of the discovery that had shifted things. It was the recognition that the battle she had just begun was far larger, more dangerous, and more personal than she had ever anticipated. Elon Musk's live stream had gone viral overnight. Millions of people across the globe had tuned in to hear his revelations about the wildfires, and while many were still skeptical, a growing number were beginning to demand answers. The media was buzzing with speculation, and political leaders were scrambling to respond. Amidst the chaos, Sophie knew that she had been thrust into something far more complex than she could have ever imagined. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up to see a text message from Rachel. "Sophie, they know you're involved. I've received threats. Be careful." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting resistance, but the fact that Rachel was now directly warning her meant that things had escalated beyond the realm of media attention and public discourse. The corporations Musk had hinted at were not just players in the background anymore. They were taking direct action. She quickly typed a response. "What do you mean? Who's threatening you?" "I'm not sure," Rachel replied, "but someone has reached out to my colleagues offering hush money. I think they've been monitoring the investigation. I don't know if you've noticed, but your name is starting to pop up in reports too. They know you're working with Musk." Sophie stared at the screen, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She had suspected that this kind of corporate interference was at play, but now it was real. They were watching her. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just an activist anymore, she was now a target. The idea of backing down never crossed her mind, but the weight of it all was starting to wear on her. What had begun as a quest to uncover the truth about the wildfires was now becoming a matter of survival. The more she dug into the data, the more resistance she encountered. The corporations Musk had mentioned were powerful, some of the wealthiest and most influential in the world. If they were involved in manipulating the fires for their own gain, Sophie knew she was standing on the precipice of something massive, and they wouldn't let her expose the truth without a fight. As Sophie grappled with the danger, she turned her attention back to the investigation. She had to keep moving forward despite the growing fear. If she stopped now, if she let the threats derail her, she would never get to the bottom of this. The stakes were too high, not just for her but for everyone whose lives had been impacted by the fires. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Elon Musk. She had sent him an email the previous night sharing her findings and asking for his help, not knowing what kind of response she would get. Now his reply was in her inbox. "Sophie, I've been following your work. We're dealing with a very dangerous situation. The fires are just the beginning. There's something bigger going on here. We need to act quickly, but you need to be careful. There are forces at play here that will stop at nothing to silence anyone who threatens to expose them. I'll be in touch soon." Musk's words were a reminder of the path she had chosen. It wasn't just the wildfire she was up against anymore. It was an entire system built on secrecy and manipulation. But the fact that Musk had reached out, acknowledging her work, meant that she wasn't alone in this fight. The question now was, how far was she willing to go to expose the truth? As she set the phone down, Sophie thought about the risks ahead. Her mind kept returning to Rachel's warning, "They know you're involved." But Sophie couldn't afford to back down. She wasn't just fighting for the truth anymore. She was fighting for those who had been silenced, for the families whose homes had been destroyed by the fires, for the people who had no idea that they were being played by the very companies that should have been protecting them. Suddenly, there was a knock at her door. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she walked toward the door and peered through the peephole. Through the peephole, to her surprise, standing on the other side was a familiar face, Jason, her colleague from the environmental watchdog group. He looked around nervously before speaking in a hushed tone. "Sophie, we need to talk. Now." She opened the door cautiously, and Jason stepped inside, looking more agitated than usual. "I've been getting calls," he said quickly. "Corporate interests are coming after you. They're making it clear that they'll stop at nothing to silence you. I don't know how long we have before they come after your sources, your team." Sophie's heart sank. It was worse than she thought. Jason continued, "We need to leave, Sophie. If we're going to get the information out, we can't stay here. They're already tracking you." Sophie shook her head. "I'm not running. I can't. Not now." Jason grabbed her arm urgently. "Sophie, if you care about getting this information out, you have to go. You need to be alive to do that. You don't know what these people are capable of. I don't want to lose you to this." The seriousness in Jason's voice broke through Sophie's resolve. For the first time since this whole ordeal had begun, she felt a cold pang of fear that cut deeper than any threat. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was real, and the people behind it were dangerous. But Sophie couldn't back down. She wasn't alone in this. She had Musk's support, Rachel's warnings, and her own drive to expose the truth. The weight of the decision was heavy, but she knew she couldn't turn back now, not after everything she had uncovered. "I won't run," she said softly, meeting Jason's eyes. "But I will be careful. I have to finish what I started." Jason nodded reluctantly. "Just promise me you'll be smart about it." Sophie swallowed, nodding in return. "I will." As Jason left her apartment, Sophie knew that this was only the beginning. The truth behind the wildfires was more dangerous than she had ever imagined, and as the storm of resistance continued to grow, she could only hold on tight and hope that she would be able to expose the forces at play before it was too late. But with every step forward, the cost of the truth became clearer, and Sophie knew there was no turning back now. Sophie had barely slept the night before, her mind still buzzing with the threats, the warnings, and the weight of the truth she was chasing. Every move now felt like a calculated risk. She had no idea how far the corporate interests would go to silence her or who else they might target along the way. But one thing was clear, there was no turning back. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Sophie froze. It wasn't Jason this time. Hesitantly, she moved toward the door and peeked through the peephole. This time, there was no one there. Her stomach clenched. Was it a trick, or was someone simply watching from a distance, waiting for her to make a mistake? Sophie's mind raced as she backed away from the door, trying to calm herself. The walls felt as though they were closing in around her. There was only so much room to breathe when you were caught in a conspiracy this deep, and the more she uncovered, the darker it became. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her reverie. It was a new message from Elon Musk. "Sophie, I've just learned something that could change everything. Meet me at the address I've sent you. It's urgent. Bring everything you have." Without hesitation, Sophie grabbed her laptop and the papers she had been compiling. She quickly typed out a reply. "I'm on my way." This could be the breakthrough she had been waiting for. Musk's message suggested that whatever he had discovered could be the final piece of the puzzle, or it could be the most dangerous information she had ever encountered. Either way, she knew she couldn't pass up the opportunity to meet him. Sophie quickly left her apartment and stepped into her car, trying to shake off the feeling that she was being followed. Every car on the road seemed to be a potential threat, every passerby a possible surveillance agent. But she couldn't afford to waste time. She drove toward the meeting point that Musk had provided, an abandoned industrial building on the outskirts of the city. When she arrived, the building looked even more ominous than she had imagined. The rusted metal walls, the broken windows, the silence that hung in the air, it all felt like a warning. Sophie took a deep breath and stepped out of her car. She didn't know what awaited her inside, but she had come too far to turn back now. As she entered the building, the musty smell of decay and neglect hit her. The room she stepped into was dimly lit, with shadows stretching across the cracked concrete floor. There was no sign of Elon Musk, but she could hear faint noises coming from a nearby room. She cautiously approached, her senses heightened. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "You made it," Musk said, stepping out from the shadows. He looked more serious than ever, his face hard with determination. "We don't have much time. What I'm about to show you changes everything." Sophie nodded, setting her things down on the table in front of him. "What's going on, Elon? What did you find?" Musk didn't waste any time. He pulled up a series of documents on his tablet and began showing her the evidence. It was worse than anything she had imagined. The wildfires weren't just the result of geoengineering gone wrong, they were part of a much larger operation, an attempt to manipulate global economies and create artificial scarcity to drive up prices for resources, including land, real estate, and even water. "I've been looking into the financial side of this," Musk said, his voice low and urgent. "These corporations aren't just trying to control the environment. They're using the fires as a cover to acquire prime real estate at a fraction of its value. But it's not just about land. They're manipulating markets, creating economic crises, and making sure they control the most vital resources. Everything. The wildfires were just the beginning." Sophie's mind reeled. This wasn't just about environmental damage, it was about a deliberate power play. The corporations were engineering a crisis to consolidate power on a global scale, using the fires as a smokescreen to push through their agenda. They were pushing the world toward chaos, leaving the rest of the population in the dark, unaware of the larger plan unfolding behind the scenes. "Why haven't the media picked up on this?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "They're being controlled," Musk answered, his tone grim. "The same corporations have ties to major media outlets. They're shaping the narrative, spinning it as a result of climate change to distract from the true cause. They're burying the evidence." Sophie couldn't fathom the depth of the conspiracy. She had suspected corporate involvement, but this was something far more sinister. She had to get this information out into the world, but she knew it wasn't going to be easy. If Musk's revelations were accurate, the consequences would be catastrophic. The corporations would stop at nothing to protect their secret, and anyone who got in their way would be silenced. Musk continued, "I'm going public with this, but we need to act fast. We can't let them have more time to bury the truth. They'll come for us, Sophie. The moment we expose this, everything will change." Sophie felt the weight of his words, the gravity of the situation pressing down on her. She had already come this far. She couldn't back out now. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. "I'm in," she said firmly. "Let's expose them." Musk nodded, a look of resolve in his eyes. "Good. We're going to need allies, people who can help us spread this message. But we'll have to be careful. We can't trust anyone connected to these companies. They have too much power, too many resources." Sophie's mind raced as she thought about the next steps. She had been gathering information for weeks, and now she had the proof she needed. But what about the risks? What about the people who would want to stop them? She had seen what these corporations were capable of, and she knew that if they wanted to silence her, they wouldn't hesitate. But she couldn't back down. She couldn't let these powerful forces continue to manipulate the world, destroying lives and destabilizing economies for their own profit. The decision was clear. Sophie was going to help Musk take down the corporations behind the wildfires. She was going to make sure the truth came to light. In that moment, Sophie realized that this wasn't just about the fires anymore. It was about fighting for the future, for a world where the truth could no longer be hidden, and for the millions of lives that had already been affected by the conspiracy she had uncovered. The battle was just beginning, but with the truth on their side, Sophie knew they had a fighting chance. And no matter what, she wasn't going to let them win. As Sophie and Elon Musk huddled around the table in the abandoned industrial building, the weight of their mission was heavier than ever. They had uncovered the corporate conspiracy, but the next steps were far from clear. The powers behind the wildfires weren't going to go down easily. In fact, they would likely stop at nothing to protect their interests. Musk had made it clear that the moment they went public, their lives would be at risk. Sophie's heart raced with both fear and resolve. This wasn't just about reporting the truth, it was about survival. Musk was the first to speak after a long silence, his tone a mixture of urgency and calculation. "We need to act fast. We've got the evidence, but it's still in our hands. If we want to ensure the world sees this, we have to be strategic. There's too much at stake. We need a network, people we can trust." Sophie nodded, her mind already working through the options. The stakes had risen exponentially since she'd first started investigating the fires. This was no longer just about exposing a hidden truth. It was about shaking the very foundations of the global economy. The corporations behind the wildfires had the resources, the power, and the influence to suppress any attempt to expose their actions. But Sophie wouldn't let them win. "We need a safe way to get the information out to the public," Sophie said. "Something they can't shut down immediately. If we just release the data on social media or the news, they'll find a way to suppress it. We need a secure platform." Musk's eyes gleamed with understanding. "I've got a few people in mind who can help with that. Some old allies. We'll need to create a multi-pronged attack, use everything at our disposal. Anonymous sources, leaks, underground platforms. The corporations are powerful, but they're not invincible. If we can spread this far enough, they won't be able to control the narrative." Sophie's thoughts raced. She had learned how the corporations controlled the media. She had seen how they manipulated public perception with ease, framing natural disasters as part of the inevitable march of climate change. If they could control the story, they could control the world. But if Sophie and Musk could spread the truth quickly enough, they could break that control. "We'll need people on the inside," Sophie continued, her mind honing in on the details. "People in these companies who can leak internal documents, get us real-time evidence of what they're doing. They'll have to be protected. These people are risking everything just by talking to us." Musk nodded in agreement. "I've already got a few contacts, but we'll need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more time the corporations have to cover their tracks. Sophie's mind was in overdrive now. She had spent the past weeks uncovering as much as she could, but now the true challenge was clear. They had to create a storm that would force the corporations to face the truth. And with every passing moment, the stakes only grew higher.